5 army personnel were killed and 6 injured after terrorists attacked a military convoy in the remote area of Jammu and Kashmir's Kathua district. This is the second attack on the army in the past 48 hours, and 24 hours after 6 terrorists were killed across 2 separate encounters in Jammu and Kashmir's Kulgam district. Now, beginning from the 9th of June, south of the Panjal, we've seen a rise in terror attacks. But what has been a huge area of concern is the kind of weapons and equipment the terrorists have been carrying. They've come armed with American M4 carbines, thermal imagers, night vision devices. But the most important recent find are the ultra sets that the militants have been carrying with them. Highly encrypted Chinese telecom gear, ultra sets as they're called. These are hybrid VHF, UHF net radios. This is military grade communication stuff. This is not the kind of equipment that you can buy off the shelf or just pick up from somewhere. Now, encrypted communication has been a part of Pakistan's deep state games. Let's not forget, in Mumbai, 26/11, 16 years ago, terrorists brought with them voice over internet phones. And in Jammu today, 2024, it's ultra sets. How important are these communication sets, and how are they a game changer in the terrorist war against the state? To discuss with me, I have today with us Colonel KPM Das, National Cyber Security Officer at Cisco, and of course my colleague Deepak Badana joins us in the News9 Plus studio. Colonel Das, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you very much.
I want to start by showing you some of the equipment that was recently captured from the terrorists in Jammu. Explain to us what we are looking at here and why is it different from anything that we've seen in the recent past. These are the so-called ultra sets that you see there. That's the complete unit that was recovered from some of the terrorists in Jammu recently after an encounter.
So essentially, this is for a classic remote, out of area, off-grid, long-term mission. Yeah.
Right.
And these are typically to be carried by not one soldier. It's going to be shared by a group of soldiers or personnel.
Right.
And if you break it down further, even the look and feel that you see.
Yes.
First, size, weight, and power swap.
Yes.
It classically looks like a military product.
Right.
Yeah.
It's ruggedized. That's what it appears. It seems.
It is ruggedized,
yes.
or it is semi-ruggedized. And second, you have the handset. You'll notice is very lightweight.
Yes.
Easy to carry, easy to handle. And you look at the keypad. It's very very user friendly.
Yes.
And potentially. That is the interface between the person, in this case a terrorist,
yes,
and the network. So between the person handling it and the network, then you have some subsystems that you can see.
Right.
One, of course, is the radio, which is inside this device.
Yes.
And that needs power.
Right.
And it needs power over a long period of time. You can't have charging cycles as frequent as 4 hours or 6 hours. It needs to last at least 12 to 24 hours.
Right.
And therefore you have a charging system which has come with it. That's going to be carried separately. It is possibly going to have a shoulder strap to help you carry it. And what you see along with it, before I get to the enclosure, what
yes.
you see along with it are those little pieces of device. Yeah,
yes.
The devices. Sometimes in one of the models, for when you need to have encryption, is to carry a key, a hardware key,
right,
which is inserted, and then you sometimes call it the crypto gun,
yes,
which actually loads the keys.
Right.
The keys hold the real, piece of intelligence in an encryption channel. The other thing that you find are multiple interfaces to the left.
Yes.
That's an interface cable, and that when you open the box, potentially, I've not seen it opened.
Yes.
You could potentially even have a video interface.
Right.
Or you could have a photography interface. You could also have a data interface. You could even have a storage device,
Right.
where you take a video and store it there. Sometimes videos are very heavy, they
Yes.
can't go over the air, and therefore you save it. So,
So,
in summary, this
yes.
is broadly the components of the system.
So this is basically a military-grade communication set that would be carried by small small teams of commandos and special forces operators. That's the kind of equipment that we're talking about here.
That's right. And mil standard because they're going to operate in all kinds of terrain.
Right.
And you see this antenna, it's a very abnormal piece of work.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very likely this radio comes with multiple antennas.
Right.
Right. It could even have a ground plane antenna, provided the operation is going to last, and they want to put up an antenna on top of a, building that they've occupied or a mountain top. So it's possible that those foldable stuff is inside the suitcase.
Right, and this allows this team of terrorists who are operating in the rugged regions of Jammu to communicate with their handlers without being intercepted. Is there any way of intercepting the signal that this handset generates?
Yeah. So if you look at how radios communicate, right? Over the air, what you have is plain. What you'll see when you monitor is you'll see signals, radio signals.
Yes.
It'll have frequencies, it'll have amplitude, and it'll have some other characteristics. Yeah.
Right.
But what goes on the air these days?
Yes.
Everything is encrypted, and this is a digital radio. It's not an analog radio. It's a digital radio.
That's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which implies that whatever you speak, or you write, or you show is converted into data, very often into IP kind of packets. There are other protocols as well other than IP. And then it gets encrypted through an encryptor. Very often the encryptor could be a hardware chip inside the radio. And in some cases there are phones, I don't think this is that kind, there are phones where it can even be, you can deliver the keys over the air. Where you can deliver the keys over the air instead of putting a gun into it.
Right. Absolutely.
And on top of it all, you can have frequency hopping, you can have direct sequence spread spectrum.
Right. So it's in short, Colonel Das, I mean, because you know your stuff very clearly. You worked on the Indian Army's Sathi handheld program, PDA, many years ago. That was way ahead of its time. So this is stuff that is possibly the most radical communication stuff that we have seen in 3 decades of insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir?
Absolutely. And it is very likely inside that box there's also a tablet or a small phone.
Right.
It could be running Android or Linux, right? Which also is a very useful interface to use because, common users are normally, and it very likely these are not military personnel. These are, transformed people who are civilians who've been trained.
Yes.
So you will have very familiar Android interfaces through a tablet or a small little phone.
Right.
Which can be used for messaging, a lot of other things. You want to mark a map, for example, you can't do it on this phone, right?
Yes.
You can mark it on that small little device.
On that tablet. Deepak, any surprises here? Terrorists staying ahead of the security forces? I was talking to a few veterans who've served in Jammu and Kashmir for several years, and they were telling me that back in the day, you had the militants walking around with Kenwood shortwave radios, and those were way ahead of what the security forces had at that time, 20 years ago.
I think what we're seeing is a rehash of what happened in the early 90s at the highest, when terrorism was at its peak in the valley.
Yes.
What we're seeing today is that, they have thermal imagers, night vision cameras.
We saw that. You've done videos on that, explainers.
We did, I think, several explainers on that.
Right.
And what we're seeing is that there is a steadfast intensification of these cases.
Right.
However, so far, if you look at data, it is not quite up to those, the data doesn't quite hold up to the fact that terrorism is increasing.
Right.
What we're seeing is the beginning of perhaps a new phase of terrorism.
Beginning of a new phase of terrorism. That's an interesting observation, Deepak, and I'm going to ask Colonel Das this. Colonel Das, we were talking about how the terrorists, this new wave of terrorism that we're seeing in Jammu over the last month or so, much better equipped than the ones in the past. They've got all of this American equipment, M4 assault rifles that have thermal imagers, night vision devices, and now these encrypted mill-grade radio sets. What's a counter to this? I mean, how can the security forces literally stay ahead of technology jumps like this?
So there are two things here. Okay, before that, I want to make a comment that unlike earlier decades,
yes,
the delta between military technology and commercial technology has been narrowing.
Right.
Yeah. So there are poor man's alternative to mill standards,
yes,
equivalent. In fact, IP67, which is an industrial standard, is very good. You can use it in a lot of military situations, right? But coming to your question proper, what can we do, right? One is to acknowledge that the envelope has changed.
right,
Yeah. So it is not a military versus military or a civilian versus civilian kind of. This is a very hybrid environment.
right,
So the profile of equipment, which includes munitions and electronic stuff, is going to be of a grade which is far superior.
yes,
And if you look at this equipment in particular, it also tells you that this is a high-stake mission for people.
right,
You can't churn this out in thousands. I know for sure. I mean, look at our procurement, cycles and policies and the cost. To have thousands of these is not possible. So these are very selective pieces of equipment, tailored for a very, very selected role for a definite time period, and to be used by very skilled, very well-trained people. So one is to acknowledge. The second is,
yes,
I think there's a challenge today that much of technology capacity at the national level, and that happens in most countries, lie outside the military space.
right,
Okay? So you have organizations like the NTRO, you have organizations like, the DRDO and all of that. These are strategic assets.
right,
They don't have a tactical footprint.
yes,
Okay? Now this is a gap that we need to bridge, figure something out, build some centers of excellence at the tactical level. I'll go back to a very good example. When counterinsurgency began,
yes,
we realized that the training which goes on in Cat A establishments and Cat B establishments are not good enough. So
Right.
then we built this whole concept of core battle schools and div
Yes.
battle schools, which are very close to the kind of operation required in that particular sector
Right.
by that particular formation. That is that final 30%. And that 30% is going to make a difference. And same thing applies to technology. Now,
Right.
if you were to intercept this and you see it on a scope and you say, this is something I need immediate action on.
Right.
I need to put my EW resources and try all we can to break whatever is there, right? There are methodologies available. They are very, very
Yes.
complex. They require a lot of compute, a lot of
Right.
storage. Now, these are not available at the tactical echelons. These are available in the strategic echelons, not even
Right.
in the operational echelons.
right,
So I think there needs to be a complete relook at how we address this. Clearly, there is a roadmap, and it's a cat and mouse game.
right. Absolutely, it's a wake-up call, Deepak. As Colonel Das said, that it's a cat and mouse game, and I think the mice in this case are getting smarter and being equipped with state-of-the-art stuff. And the point of discussing these military-grade radios that we've discovered is that I don't think communication gets the kind of attention that it deserves.
Yeah.
We focus on the small arms, we focus on the grenades and the guns, but then the kind of capabilities that these kind of comsets give terrorists like this, as Colonel Das so brilliantly put it, that you could analyze the mission profile of a terrorist outfit that came equipped with these kind of radios. That's changing, isn't it, now with the war in Ukraine?
Oh, absolutely.
It's an EW war, as a lot of people have been calling it.
I think more important than anything is that we must ready ourselves for this new phase that has started. For very long, the idea was that terrorism has been beaten, and
Yes.
so there were calls to pull out troops from this
Yes.
region. A number of them have gone to the Chinese border now. I think India will have to, we'll have to be ready for a new phase of confrontation.
Possibly a new phase of confrontation, and that could well be the objective of these new attacks in Jammu to keep the Indian army tied down there and not move troops across to Ladakh to face off against the Chinese. That could well be the name of the game. But Colonel Das, closing comments. The war in Ukraine has, as we were discussing, has thrown up the kind of communication technologies that we didn't believe existed in the past. And one of those game-changing comm technologies is Starlink, that you have these communication handsets that rely on this network of thousands of satellites, which the Russian military has had to kind of invest considerable resources in kind of intercepting. Do you believe that this is going to be the future of conflict, really? Advanced communication systems which miss the gaze of the normal military minds simply because they are not weapons, but they are enablers. They're very powerful enablers. Do you see a reset that's required in the way we look at military-grade communications, especially after the kind of equipment that's being recovered from terrorists in Jammu?
Absolutely. So, I mean, just take the Ukraine example, right? For example, I think communications have been front and center of the strategy. Yeah. And like you said, Starlink and all the low orbit satellites have made a huge difference. They just swamp that space in a manner that you don't have any blind spots in the battlefield.
Right.
Now, if you were to carry it into a scenario in J&K, we do have challenges of terrain, all of us know it. And those challenges of terrain, where there are a lot of, dead ground and, all of that, a lot of blind spots, I think potentially the gaps will have to be covered through a complete, a fabric of satellite support.
Absolutely.
But that said, I also want to comment on what you just said. If you traditionally look at the way operations are planned, in that little corner at the end, there will be something called command and electronics. Yeah. Right. So, which will be tucked away, very nuanced in one corner, and something almost like an afterthought. I've said this during my service as well. I think it's time to give it the place that it deserves in the mainstream planning and all of that.
Right.
Because it's going to alter the outcomes.
Absolutely. Communications is something that you can not afford to avoid, as Colonel Das so pithily put it. And he's a man who knows the insides out of military communications. He's worked on some of the key projects of the Indian Army. But thank you very much for joining us this evening, Colonel Das, and highlighting this new threat that we are faced with, the threat of military-grade hybrid radio sets that the militants are carrying to enable them to create more havoc in Jammu, as they've been doing over the last couple of days. Thanks very much.